Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear friends. We are very happy to greet you here today at the Legal Forum. First of all, we would like to express our gratitude to the Ministry of Justice for such an exceptional organization of the Legal Forum. We would also like to thank all of the members of the roundtable discussion for coming here today. So the topic of our workshop is the tax monitoring, the results of the pilot project. So before we move on to this project, I would like to introduce our speakers. This is Peter Enhart, representative of Ernst & Young, head of the taxation and legal practice in the CIS. Dmitry Kornev from MTS, the head of administration department. This is Dmitry Fadeev, deputy chairman of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of the Russian Federation. This is Ted Fowler, general manager, global tax, Procter & Gamble from the USA. We also have with us today Wilbert Hubens, general manager, global tax from Shell Netherlands, and Jean-Pierre Lieb from Ernst & Young. Jean-Pierre worked for a long time in the Ministry of Finance in France, as well as in the taxation office. Dear colleagues, if you'd allow me, I would like to say a brief introductory word while we decided to pick this topic and why we believe that this topic is very urgent today. So I have to tell you that the Legal Forum gives us a unique platform. We've been participants of the forum for the last 4 years, and I have to say that we presented 2 topics at the Legal Forum, which were later translated into practice. So these topics in these issues were later translated into legislative proposals, which are currently, if we're talking about horizontal monitoring, are being reviewed in the State Duma of the Russian Federation. That's why I think it is very important that we're using this forum as a platform, and we are proposing to implement certain institutions into Russian legislation, and it finds further use after we start implementing it into practice. When we talk about the Federal Taxation Service, then I can say that several years ago we set quite an ambitious goal to drastically reduce the number of taxation disputes. That's why we approached this issue for as an system out of court settlements of all of the taxation issues. You can see what the situation used to be before 2009 and how it changed afterwards. So what we offered is to introduce a mandatory out of court settlement procedures of disputes which found support in the State Duma and of the presidents of the Russian Federation. And you should see the results which we managed to achieve. We managed to reduce the number of taxation disputes. We reduced the number of complaints. And of course, that gives us ground to be very optimistic. Furthermore, a Russian Federation enjoyed a very lively debate about settling disputes in the taxation authorities, amicable dispute settlements. But we have been developing this practice in the last 2 years. So there were more than 40 of such settlements, and the first settlement was reached at the level of the Presidium of the High Arbitration Court. And I think that the current trend is the development of the entire settlement procedure and the system of such procedures which are possible today as part of tax administration. So if we're talking about horizontal monitoring, then on the one hand we can say that this is a form of taxation control, but it is also an opportunity for out-of-court settlements of disputes. So 2 years ago, we've made initial agreements or initial treaties with 5 companies as part of the horizontal monitoring system. It was a pilot project. We wanted to look at the feasibility and the opportunity to use this procedure in the Russian Federation. Of course, to do that, we studied international experience quite extensively. We visited a number of other countries to understand how this system functions in other countries and whether it's going to be transplanted into Russian Federation. So I can tell you that in the last 2 years, the system which is in place is quite efficient. We managed to reach significant results. We decreased the number of tax disputes. We developed a number of methodological positions, and I think that we managed to establish more open relations between tax administration and taxpayers, and I think we managed to reach a completely new level of achievements, which again gives us a reason to be quite optimistic. So all of this form the basis of prerequisites to develop the draft law. As you know, right now, this draft law is undergoing review in the State Duma, so we do hope that this draft will be passed during the spring session of the Duma. So that you understand, I would like to underline that we're absolutely open. We are ready to hear your feedback. We would like to get your comments so we can work together when we're preparing for the second hearing of the bill, and we can take into account all of the issues that call for further improvements. And of course, as part of this legislation, we're developing a number of interest mechanisms where we're trying to establish this institute at the legislative level, although this was not the experience in a number of other countries, but we do believe that it is also possible. So here we have to look at the real situation, the situation on the ground, so to speak, in each country. So as part of this draft legislation, we also envisaged a number of provisions that would free the taxpayer from responsibility, would decrease responsibility, would introduce a number of mitigating procedures. So then we are developing the mutual settlement procedure. As you know, in the current legislation, it only exists as a treaty against double taxation. We also introduced motivated opinion of a tax authority so that a taxpayer would better understand the position of the tax authority from the start and not when they file a claim. So this system is similar to the system of rulings. So, dear colleagues, in our opinion, as I've already mentioned, it is an extremely important step, a step to improve tax administration. And I would like to move to our discussion, and I would like to give the floor to Peter. Peter, what we would like to understand is how is it done in the US and in other countries? How is the regulation of this model is done in the US and other countries? Thank you very much, Sergey. I would probably like to talk about international trends. We have very recent observations that we managed to achieve in a number of jurisdictions that you already mentioned. And they give us a certain perspective, not just about who we are, but where we're moving to, especially when it comes to global approach to such programs as horizontal monitoring, because as you know, what is very important is a program of mutual or joint compliance. First of all, I would like to give you a context, and I would like to say that we shouldn't forget about what is being done in Russia. It holds a lot of prospects, but we also have to look at other 25 countries and see how such programs are defined in those jurisdictions. But as a concept, such a program of expanded cooperation, it's quite young. It's less than 10 years old. So the first countries who started it was the USA and the Netherlands. Actually, in the USA, it was launched in 2005. So the United States used a compliance assurance program, which is quite similar to the Dutch program. So there were only 17 taxpayers back then. But in the last 9 years, we saw that the number of taxpayers grow up almost to 200, and we see that a number of other players joined, the so-called developing economies, Korea, and of course Russia, where 18 months ago the first project was launched, and it was quite successful. So I would say that overall, it doesn't matter what it is called in each country. And each country has its own specific features. But when we look at it fundamentally, there are basic principles which are similar or which are the same. We are talking about corporate compliance, which has to be there. So what are we talking about here? We are talking about a program which allows to build the relations on the basis of trust, on the basis of transparency. When a taxpayer shares or discloses the information in real time, information about large transactions, about new positions in a lot of ambitious projects, when they disclose all of the details that are required for a dialogue with the tax authorities so that they can develop a single opinion. And what do they get in return? Well, first, they get a fast response to their queries, which takes into account the specificity of the business and the sector in which the business is operating. And as a result, that creates more awareness both for the tax authorities and for the taxpayer when it comes to correct answers. So they do not really, they spend much less time on traditional audit or checking procedures and other tax administration procedures. Therefore, what were the initial principles that were established 8 or 9 years ago? I think they should still be in play. Commercial information. So it's not enough to know the technicality of the taxation. Taxation topic, of course, impartiality, proportionality, openness of information and transparency, as well as timeliness. As you know, the business is moving faster and faster, so we do not have the luxury to take months and discuss issues. You know, sometimes the deals are made in one day or in just several days. Therefore, We have to act fast. We have to understand business realities. Of course, there is another principle which was added by OECD last year, and this is the principle of a key role which the internal tax audit should play. Again, this is a reflection of the fact that the tax policy and the management of tax risks is becoming so significant for a company that they really need to implement it for corporate governments, and the board of directors should pay close attention to establishing such a systematic control as part of their general approach to creating a strategy of a company and establishing a risk management strategy. The OECD report, if you remember, the tax administration forum was held 1 year ago in Russia, in Moscow, and it was attended by a deputy director of Dutch taxation service, so he was moderating it and presenting it to all of the participants. I think it was attended by around 45 countries. So the main conclusions were made not about the states of things, but also how we can progress and how we can develop these programs further. So it was said, that 25 countries already have such programs, and I think it's quite impressive if you think that it has been done in 9 years. But when we start talking about how we can develop further, I think we have to pay closer attention to maintaining not just the letter of the law, but actually to keeping up the spirit of the law. And we believe that it can only be achieved through an open discussion. We have to increase and to speed up mutual transparency, both on the side of taxpayers and on the side of tax authorities. The significance of the role of taxation policy is increasing at the level of the board of directors. What I liked even more when we talk about the future, especially the future of compliance, then especially taking into account how many countries are already part of the process. So why don't we develop a program which would allow taxpayers to be part of the program multilaterally if they have if they operate in several jurisdictions. Again, Ernst & Young, we have even more updated information than 2013. I'd say that 3 weeks ago, we published a survey of 800 CFOs from the largest companies in the world across 6 continents. What we heard from such a representative group, it was that 70% of the largest companies, I would say the majority of the companies, are striving to achieve more open relationship with tax authorities, either in one or in several countries where they operate, especially in the last 2 years. We also saw that there is appetite. So we noticed that it exists on the side of tax authorities. So in the last 2 years, a lot of our respondents said that the actual tax authorities, whether in one or in several jurisdictions, are very proactive in offering to establish more open and efficient relations. It doesn't really necessarily mean formal programs, but we also asked them about it, and we saw that more than half of these 800 largest organizations, they participate in such programs as a CAP, or to formulate it differently, mutually compliance, and 13 companies are following horizontal monitoring model, and almost half of the companies give a very positive evaluation of their experience. If we dig even deeper and if we try to understand why they're not saying no, it's only because it is at an initial stage. A lot of these programs are just being introduced initially, so we cannot summarize it yet.
To conclude, what we can draw from this is that despite any other global trends we can observe in tax politics that are indicative of elements of mistrust, if not on the part of the taxpayers, but on the part of the politicians, statesmen. I mean, such initiatives that come from the G20, from OECD, like the BEPS initiative. And if you delve deeper into it, you will see a lot that says about an atmosphere of mistrust. Nevertheless, on the backdrop of such an atmosphere on the part of both taxpayers and tax authorities, there is appetite towards a joint compliance. My explanation is in two key points. This is the uncertainty about the direct result about such initiatives as the BEPS initiative from OECD, which creates the grounds, the soil for all players of tax relations to use such programs as CAP to eliminate this growing uncertainty. That's one thing. And the second is if you globally move to this new era, which will bring about more information exchange between taxpayers and the tax authorities, and more information will be disclosed via reports. So the burden to join such programs will be less than it used to be, and this is perhaps another incentive for us to consider this. Therefore, our vision of the future as regards corporate compliance is bright, including I'm totally sure that we will see a continuation in Russia of what has been started. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. I'd like to give the floor to Jean-Pierre and hear some French experience and your vision of this program.
Well, thank you. Very proud to be able to share with you the French experience in this legal forum. As you already said it, I was at the head of this program a few months ago. I'm sure that at the end of the presentation you will be convinced that France and Russia had more common subjects than you can now expect, or that you had in mind. I will try during this presentation just to stress the main features of the French pilot, and try also to underline the experience that we had, which could help you in building your own experience. First, a few words about the context, which is, I think, something important to present. Of course, we had in mind the Dutch experience, and for the French administration, the Dutch tax administration has always been seen as a tax administration with a step forward all tax administrations, because it is very open to the business, it's a very imaginative tax administration, and so we had this experience in front of us. Of course, the OECD studies and all the work which has been done inside the FTA was also an incentive for us to go towards this type of relationship. But the key element which opened the door to this experience and to this pilot was a real strong political backup, and to have beside the tax administration the government and the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Budget saying, well, that's a good choice. It is a critical element to the success of this program. And what is interesting to have in mind is that this enhanced relationship program has been put on the table in the same time that the government took anti-abuse measures. And it was a way for the government to show that it could be harsh against certain type of taxpayers, but it could also be very open-minded toward others who will be ready to be compliant. And the idea behind that was that the tax administration has, of course, a role of control, of auditing companies, but it has also the objective to support the economy and to help the business in its way of going to the market. I should also stress a few general considerations about the French cultural context. At that time, everybody, the businesses, but also the tax administration, felt that there was a large gap between both sides of the table. And we need to find a way to bridge this gap. And indeed, the usual way of dealing with a company which was tax audit had found its limits. It was more a way of creating more tensions than rather find a cooperative way of discussing common topics and helping the business to reach a fair and compliant way of assessing its taxes. And there was a last point I would like to mention, that the enhanced relationship, the cooperative compliance, the horizontal monitoring is in fact a very clever way for the tax administration to ask the business and the taxpayer to self-assess its own risk. The taxpayer, in fact, will have to choose either it wants to have a clear and fair and transparent relationship with the taxpayer, or be a normal and usual taxpayer which will face normal and usual tax audit. A few words about the main feature of the French pilot and the way we designed the cooperative approach. Just first, a comment about the name of the pilot. It's a trust-based relationship. The word trust is in the heart of this pilot. The first feature is that it is built on an informal review which focuses on the risky points of the company. So it is not a normal and usual tax audit, it's just a relationship which focuses on the main subject. So you have to have a large amount of money which will be at stake, and which will just focus on the risk which are being shared from both sides of the table. The second point is that it will encompass all taxes due by the taxpayer. Direct taxes, VAT, stamp duty, well, just name it, it will be inside this pilot. Third, and that is also a key element of the way we designed this experiment, it is a tax review which begins prior to filing requirements. So we do not wait a tax return to engage this relationship. All this relationship is designed to prepare a fair tax return. So to the opposite of a tax examination which just look to the past, the enhanced relationship just focus on the present and the future. And it's changed quite a number of ways you discuss and you exchange with the taxpayer. The third point is that it will also offer certainty in different ways. The first way is to admit that the taxpayer could ask every question to the tax administration. Of course, it must concern a very important point for both the taxpayer and the tax administration. It's not to avoid tax intermediaries or tax auditors. But when there is a point in the legislation which is not clear, it's the right of the taxpayer to ask the administration, and it's the duty of the tax administration to offer a fast response. The fact is that this response could just be a solution for this single taxpayer, and the year later or 2 years or 3 years later, the tax administration could change its opinion, but not for the past, just for the future. Another key feature is that the review should take place in a very short period of time. The purpose of this experiment is not to increase the burden on the business shoulders, but just to be efficient, to go right to the point, and to give a green light as soon as possible to their business. And at the end of the process, the tax review should agree with the accounts of the company, and this will lead to the fact that the tax administration will not open in the future a tax examination concerning this year. So, of course, this pilot is built around a few principles. Reciprocal transparency, so it's transparency on both sides. The company should open all its bank accounts. It should be helpful for the tax administration, but the tax administration should also explain its own issues and problems when the taxpayer asks for help or for just a point of view on one piece of regulation. Speed is always something important. You have to be quick on both sides, and you have to go to write the important part. Third, both sides should understand the aim of the other side, which is fairness for the tax administration, and also competitiveness for the business. And last but not least, there is a principle of mutual trust, and trust should be built during a long period of time. So you do not buy trust just saying, well, we have a confident relationship. No, you have to discover each other and build this relationship through time. I will add a few points. The first one is that all the approach is focusing on risk, and since the first meeting, the company has to open every document. even if he had a legal advice from a lawyer, he should show it to the tax administration. So all parties are at the same level of knowledge, and it's important to be sure that you understand what is in the mind of your counterpart. A second element is that at the end of the process, there is just 4 solutions. The first one is that the tax administration does agree with the taxpayer tax return, and that's fine. Secondly, it has some observation to make, and in that case, the taxpayer has to correct the tax return without any fine, penalty, or interest. A third case, you might have a point of dispute because, well, that's life, and that's not a problem because in that case, and if both parties have a real faith in the fact that, well, this point is not clear, then we go to see a court, the judge, and we will, of course, follow its decision. And the fourth way is that if we don't feel comfortable, either the taxpayer or the tax administration, then it is always possible just to interrupt this relationship. I'd like also to underline another point of the French experiment, which is that it didn't require a change of the law. We thought that to be able to build this trust relationship, we didn't have to put another constraint on both parties. And it was very important for us just to work by and through a sort of contract, which is quite unusual concerning tax matters, which just organize the way we have our discussion, our exchange of documents, and which precise all the engagements that each party will have for the beneficial of the other. So, not to be too long, I will just like to conclude by a few key points concerning the French experience, which could help you. The first one is that we do not have to undermine the cultural change which lies behind such an experience. It has been very difficult in France to find the team who will be able to deal with this relationship. You should ask for people who will be volunteer to participate to such an experiment, both from the business side, but also from the staff of the tax administration. If you do not have the correct mindset, you will face a very bad result. The second point is that when you just try a pilot, there is no resources issues. But if you just try to forecast the future when you expect to have more and more businesses joining the program, then you have the resources issue which will raise. And you have, of course, to anticipate it. And it's not a real easy issue because you have the mindset to change. Third, trust without certainty is impossible. So on the balance, you have on one side trust, transparency, but on the other side, you have to offer certainty. And certainty, as I said, is both things. Is first to be sure of what regulation you apply at one moment. And secondly, when you have reviewed 1 year, well, this year is closed, it just focuses on the future. The fourth key feature is that you don't need necessarily new legal provisions. Just try a normal and unusual contractual agreement with taxpayer, and I'm sure it will work because it's another part of the way you can change the mindset. And the last point, it is that of course, it's very difficult to assess the outcome of such a relationship in just 1, 2, or 3 years. And you do not have a return on investment immediately, especially if you think that this return on investment is immaterial. It's immaterial because it is trust, because you have a better understanding of the businesses, and also because you have a very interesting way of discovering what are the market practices, and that has no price for a tax administration. The last word I will have on the French project is that it had actually 12 businesses in the pilot, and that the French government had just announced 3 weeks ago that it will expand the pilot to 30 more businesses, mid-cap businesses, and that led me to my final conclusion. It's that usually in the world, this enhanced relationship is focused on large company. We focused in France to a large scope of company just to test the concept. And I'm quite glad to see that in the Netherlands, they are moving from those large company to a smaller company because they deeply feel that it is also a very clever answer to those type of businesses. But of course, if you expand this experience to a more larger type of companies, then the face-to-face meeting that you usually have between the taxpayer and the tax administration will certainly need a third party to help. And on that point, you have also to have some more reflection, because if you do not anticipate this point, you will, of course, have huge tension on your resources. Well, that was a short presentation of the French experience, and I'm ready, of course, to answer all questions you have on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre. I support you fully. And dear colleagues, maybe before we give the floor to our right and honorable friends from large companies, then I would like to hear about the pilot project which is happening in Russia. We're talking quite a lot about it, but I would like to understand what shape it is taking, because a lot of people do not really fully understand how the interaction is happening from a technical point of view. So if you do not object, I would like to give the floor to Dmitry Kornev. I would like to remind you that 5 businesses participated in the pilot project. We looked at several sectors: metallurgy, telecoms, electricity, and there was also an international company that participated in the project. That's why, Dmitry, I give you the floor. How do you evaluate the project? What sort of challenges you run into, and how do you evaluate the efficiency? Dear colleagues, good afternoon. If you'd allow me, I would probably continue the point that the previous speaker was making, and I would like to quote Nietzsche about 2 porcupines. So when it's cold, they try to come close to each other, but at some point, they start running into each other's spikes. So I wouldn't say that this is a classic example that illustrates this project, but I would say that this image really can provide us a characteristic of how we were moving towards this implementation. So what does it mean for business, and does it increase the risks, the position of our company? And we also believe that this is probably one of the main factors that we have to discuss. That's why I would like to demonstrate why we believe the ideology is becoming more open, especially when we talk about the development of the Russian tax system. In a mid-term perspective, it does not mean an increase of risks, but on the other hand, it actually decreases risks for business. So I would say that the first postulate that is more pragmatic, and this is probably one of the arguments that provided us with motivation. This argument is based on the understanding that the taxation system in Russia is being developed quite dynamically, and the analytical function of the taxation service is also evolving rapidly. That is why we understood that we have to be a part of this process, otherwise we would incur even bigger risks because we will not understand what is happening. The second factor was less pragmatic, but if you allow me, I have to say that it was based on our understanding how Russia should develop overall. We understood that the efforts of the tax authorities when it comes to the development of taxation system, for instance, moving towards wider out-of-court settlements and trying to settle resolutions out of courts, we understood that it was very significant and highly prioritized. So what is the share of criminal regulation of legal relations? We believe that it was very important. So the taxation service and tax authorities is the body that should have full authority to settle any sort of tax debates and tax disputes. And the third criterion why we decided to participate in this project, that of course the taxation service of the Russian Federation has clearly demonstrated, especially when we talk about midterm perspective, the tax authority is ready to make a relevant decision. If you would allow me, I would like to switch to an example why we believe it is of utmost importance. If we look at the structure of tax audits that existed in our company, then we see a very clear trend. So if we compare the results of the tax audits to the overall tax burden of a company, then of course all of the taxation is lower. That's why we believe that when it comes to the tax service, it probably would be more important for this tax service to understand the structure of the actual taxation and why does it give a bigger comfort, especially when we're talking about the budget. What was also extremely important for us, if we're trying to analyze the actual taxation structure, then our position is very clear. The tax service is really trying to gain a deeper understanding of the business process. They are not interested in discovering mistakes on invoices, but they're mostly interested in understanding the process and in interpreting it. And until we establish a very objective, productive dialogue on harmonization of the actual business process and business organization, then we will never get certainties, especially in the midterm and long-term perspective. Therefore, what were the objectives of MTS? Of course, what MTS was looking for is to have an opportunity to have a preliminary tax settlement, and now, of course, settlement of all disputes. We wanted to decrease our costs. We understood quite clearly, having analyzed the costs that we incurred during field audits, and it's just not the printing of documents or what we spent on lawyers or what we spent to establish certain modes of operations, and because we have to pull our managers out of their day-to-day business, we realized that we incur quite significant expenses. That's why we realized that when we established internal control, we were trying to understand whether the tax service could use internal controls in the company instead of going into full-scale audit. And of course, electronic documents control was very important for us. I'm sorry if the font is too small, but that's why, if you would allow me, I'd like to summarize our results. So the first results that we achieved in our experience, they give us a lot of hope, especially because that when we joined the project, we understood. We did not understand whether we should disclose the information fully. Of course, we tried to keep some things separate from the tax authorities, some of our internal procedures. We also understood that the tax service runs into a lot of challenges when it comes to giving us definite answers to our requirements. And I think one of the most important results was that when it comes to the relations with our tax authorities, and I can tell you that I'm quite sure that we managed to overcome the difficulties. Right now, our company is more open in sharing our risks and problems with the tax service because we understand that we can actually get helpful answers. That's why I would like to give you several facts we did not really expect, but we received a confirmation on a number of very different, very certain positions when it comes to the taxation. We also believe it was a very significant factor. Another significant aspect, and we got a pre-confirmation from the tax authority, say that they are ready to view our internal control system as a so-called interface which they can use for tax audit of our company. What are our expectations? Of course, we looked at more substantial operations in terms of the tax declaration or the tax reports. So this is a very optimistic evaluation, and I would urge you to trust it. But we believe that if this project continues, then until the end of 2014, we will be able to cover more than 50% of the taxation positions in the company. We believe that they will be formalized and fully described, and so we will hear from the tax authorities, will be informed about their position. We're not talking about approving the position, but we're talking about formalizing these positions and actually fixing them. We do believe that all of the limitations and all of the potential risks which can exist here, then we will understand that they would be clearly defined for us, and there is nothing but benefit that we see here. So what sort of instruments do we see as crucial in our relations with the tax service? First of all, there's a combination of two factors. First, creating an objective instruments of control which are based on the requirements of the tax authorities, and which provides analytical information to the tax authorities so that they can understand how these instruments are structured within the company, and also an internal tax control system. We are saying that when it comes to each item that is being taxed, we provide the tax service a detailed description. We give them the structure about our technical position, and at the end of my presentation, I will give you a specific example. So we are saying here that we have certain risks, and we compare certain elements of control about which we inform the tax authorities to these risks. So what do we mean? In this project, based on the OECD recommendations, we would like to exchange a so-called data package or a single file. This file will be structured and will contain the analytics of all of the current operations in the company for a taxation period that are controlled and have been approved as part of our relations with the tax authority. So what is the structure of the data file? Well, we define important or substantial items, taxation items. We define these positions. We include them into our reporting, and we also coordinate it with the tax authority and integrate tax control instruments. So we believe that this is something that we submit together with our tax declaration, and we believe that it would be a very effective instrument. What do we think it gives us? And of course, we understand what this instrument provides us with. I'm really sorry for the term, but we believe that it would actually truly motivate the tax authority to actually stop doing the so-called chamber audits, if I can formulate it like this. But we also believe that we give a very clear instrument that is clear to us, clear to the tax authorities, and it also provides an interface for the tax authority to implement their control. We understand what this instrument entails. We understand that the tax authority trusts us. We understand that it is clear for them. So we think that using this approach as the basis for cooperative compliance, this approach is optimal and acceptable for us. And the reason I'm saying this is that other participants of these pilot projects, they selected other mechanisms. So maybe when my colleagues will comment on the bill today, but still, I have to say that compliance with the technical structure with the bill is one thing, but I think it should allow different approaches. So the approach which we use was the approach that we selected, but we do not claim that this is the only approach. If you'd allow me, I would like to show you. I would like to show you some illustrations of our system. As you can see here, you see the actual interface. So this is an actual effective system. So you see the income tax, value-added tax. So these are all of the tax declaration, which we usually submit electronically. If we click on one item within the structure, then we can usually go down to one element of the tax declaration. So let's move it here on the depreciation of fixed assets. This is actually an operating system. This is our real data for 2013. So right now we are on the page where we see all of our sales expenses, all of the expenses that are billed as part of the declaration. So here you see certain positions that are needed in order to provide a detailed declaration for the reporting period. So if we click on any item, then again, it takes us to another page which directs us to fixed assets depreciations. So here we go from the aggregated basically items to a very specific one. I'm extremely sorry one more time that you can't really see it and the font is too small. But what we were trying to show here, that the tax authority gets an opportunity to actually go down to a very specific item. As you can see, this is a very detailed spreadsheet on our fixed assets, especially split into depreciation groups. And here we will see a special card of a fixed asset that demonstrates how we calculate depreciation on these particular assets, for which period it is done, and what is the volume. So this is the card I just mentioned. In this window, you see the asset ID, which is also one of the elements of control that we approved with the tax authority. Here we see a specific fixed asset item. We can show what depreciation was calculated. So what I wanted to say is that we understand, even when we use horizontal monitoring, an audit still is an audit. But again, we are creating an instrument which would be trusted by the tax authority. So we create an interface that the tax authority would use to evaluate the correctness of our calculations. So the example which I demonstrated, and again, I do apologize that the font was too small, but again, it was related to an unclear tax item. Was related to the fact where the depreciation was calculated when the company has a technical position, and because the primary accounting document on the new facility comes much later. So we took a technical position that we can actually calculate depreciation, and we can start it from the time when the facility was commissioned. Of course, for this we understand that it calls for a certain system of control. First of all, we have to prove that the site has been commissioned. This is one control. And the second control is that we should only do it when the documents are collected. So we use this example to demonstrate that each of these items has a corresponding control. Therefore, here the only issue for the tax authority is if they trust it, it's enough. If they do not trust our information, they do not agree, then they have an extremely simple, very fast and efficient mechanism to actually identify the numerical value of this disparity, and we are ready for a settlement procedure.
This will include either a motivated opinion or judgment, or if we disagree, then yes, we go to court. However, in our view, this will help us significantly to mitigate the risks because then they will become predictable. So with your permission, finalizing this statement, my presentation, in this case, we managed to put everything in place and reach some harmony in our relations. Thank you. Thank you, Dmitry. Any questions to Dmitry, or any questions regarding the pilot in general? Does anybody have any considerations to share? Does horizontal monitoring help in resolving issues around transfer pricing? Is there any synchronization? If you allow me, this question should better go to Sergey, but we accept the fact that transfer pricing is an isolated, an independent element that has its own toolkit outside of tax monitoring. But let me forward this question to... Okay, let's continue. Let's discuss transfer pricing separately, because there are issues and questions there. But now I'd like to give the floor to our chief of the inspection, who does the administration, Olga Mahalova. My question to you is this: what challenges do you face at present, and what's your perspective, your evaluation of effectiveness compared with conventional tax control methods? Dear colleagues, let me note this: 18 months our tax inspection has been operating in a horizontal monitoring environment. We are a sector-based administration. We've signed an agreement with Severstal, the major metal holding company. Prior to this agreement, our relations were reduced to a situation where we had some on-site audits to review the company. Tax risks identified by the tax administration were disputed in court by the company, and the company stated that the tax risks should be hidden from the tax administration as much as possible. Now, 2 points that I'd like to note, even though a lot can be said, but the key 2 points are this. One, our relations now currently involve openness and trust. We don't even use the system that Dmitry presented. We use an online system. We have a direct access to all the analytical and synthetic accounts. We can ask questions regarding current transactions performed by the taxpayer. That is, we act almost as internal auditors, and the company in turn can identify future risks by asking questions, formulating questions, and sending them to the tax administration for us to state our position on that. We have agreed some 10 items as of today with the company. In addition to all that, the court cases that we had before this horizontal monitoring approach currently boil down to a new agreement with the company being drafted to sign a peaceful agreement for the long term. That's kind of a principle of accounting by the company, that when you sign this agreement for the previous period, the company will change its policy, agreeing it with the tax administration for current and future periods. So for these items, we'll be able to avoid any further tax disputes, and they will become transparent in terms of tax control. That is, will not have to waste time on any control events, because it's not risk, it's an open position agreed with the tax administration and the company. So hopefully this agreement is now being drafted, and hopefully we'll be signing it in the next month or so. On the whole, another point I wanted to make, I entirely agree with colleagues. The key challenge is the mindset, the mentality of the tax inspectors and company personnel. And over these 18 months, I can tell you that we've made certain progress, but 18 months is not enough. That's not much. Most importantly, we've achieved a lot on the level of senior management and the managers of the tax administration. We can now hold an open dialogue without compromise, but there's no global understanding for the time being. We need some time. We need steps to be made on both sides for everybody to understand that this is indeed trust, mutual confidence, and we can continue with more open relations in the future. So our pilot is about to be completed now, and hopefully relations with the company will continue into the future, because the company is expressing its willingness to continue this kind of relations with us. If you have any questions, I'm here to take them. Thank you, Olga. Of course, the situation around the psychology of our employees, of personnel, both company personnel and tax personnel, is a challenge, because management has decided, but then something must be done. The same situation was true in other projects, because trying to prove it to your people that they got to do this, that if it's unjustified, you have to cancel it, support your local authorities, that required a lot of time and effort as well. But now we can see some different results. So this is a process that is a long-term process, but we will definitely manage to achieve some result. I would like now to give the floor to Ted Fowler from P&G. We'd like to understand, since you're involved in similar programs across various countries, and having listened to some Russian experience, what do you think about it, and what can you say about your own participation in this program?
Okay, well, first off, thank you for the invitation to be here today. It certainly is a privilege and an honor to be asked to participate in this important topic. I think maybe to answer the question, I'd like to address a few of the slides I've because I think it'll set up how we think about overall transparency as well as what I'll call partnering with governments around the world to ensure that we can minimize the amount of controversy as a company that we face regarding our business operations. Having said that, however, given I do work for the largest marketing company in the world, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Procter & Gamble. First off, we are a company of brands. We have over $25 billion brands, we like to call them, within the company, many of which you might recognize that are popular here in Russia and Eastern Europe, including Gillette, Pampers, Tide, and Ariel are just a few. A little bit about the P&G business in Russia. Obviously, a number of brands. We entered the market in 1991, so still a relatively young business for us, but in that time period have grown it to be one of the largest markets and most important markets for P&G. We currently employ about 2,000 people around the country. We have 3 plants that both produce products for the Russia market as well as for export. And we have about $3.5 to $4 billion of sales today in the market and continue to grow that at a pretty healthy pace. If I think about what are our guiding tax principles, which ultimately lead to this question of transparency and certainty, the first principle we follow as a company is that the business leads and tax follows, okay? Another way to say that is tax follows the business substance. Okay, we don't believe in the sort of tax planning or strategies where tax is the lead. We don't believe that is sustainable on a long-term basis. Second, we do believe in transparency. We started an initiative about 10 years ago to enter into bilateral advanced pricing agreements. We actually prefer bilateral as compared to unilateral because we think they're more certain and more transparent. We have 16 bilateral APAs around the world today that cover about 60% of our business, mostly in the developed world, although we just recently have successfully concluded 2 in developing markets. We hope to initiate and eventually get into a bilateral APA with Russia. And we've got several more in progress. We believe, given transfer pricing is our single largest issue globally, that this is a way to try to bring predictability and certainty with regards to that issue. We believe that with a business-led tax follows and transparent set of principles, that ultimately leads to predictability and sustainability, which is a publicly traded company who wants to have as predictable of an earning stream as possible. Having predictability and certainty is key in the tax area, okay? With that, I was asked to talk a little bit about the U.S. compliance assurance process. Okay, this is basically the U.S. Horizontal monitoring process, which is a relatively new program. It began in 2005 as a pilot, but made permanent in 2011 given the success of the program. You know, the idea, however, of getting into a discussion between taxpayers and the U.S. government on a particular issue and getting that agreed prior to filing a return wasn't new. There were other processes to do that. The U.S. has a private letter ruling process where you can go in and ask for comfort on a particular transaction prior to executing the transaction. They also had what was called a pre-filing agreement process, which would allow you to basically, prior to filing a return, basically review and negotiate an issue with the U.S. government prior to filing your return. But there was not a process to review the entire return and basically get that agreed to prior to filing. The eligibility to get into the U.S. CAP program is you must have at least $10 million of assets or more. It's also eligible for foreign companies that are investing into the United States. You must be publicly held or at least agree to provide certified financial statements as part of the program. You cannot have any existing controversy with the U.S. government with regards to really any issues, okay? So therefore, you've got to agree to basically open up all of your material books and records to the U.S. government. And importantly, and I think unique to the program, is you must be current, okay? You cannot be accepted into the CAP program unless you've only got one tax year that has not been closed. And that, frankly, is a barrier right now for many companies getting into the program, just given the amount of resources the government puts onto corporate audits. Many companies are many years still behind in the process, as well as the amount of controversy on certain issues, most notably transfer pricing. Okay? When they made the program permanent in 2011, they basically came up with a three-phased approach, which I think actually is a pretty good practice. One is called a pre-CAP phase, and that is where there's a memorandum of understanding that is entered into by both the U.S. government and the taxpayer to work in a cooperative and transparent way to eliminate open tax years. So basically to get current, okay? And again, you can't officially get into a true CAP program until you've gotten current, which is what the pre-CAP process is an attempt to do. Once you've gotten current, and there's been a, call it, sustained approach of transparency and trust and cooperation, then a taxpayer can enter into the actual CAP process, which, as we've discussed, is not a lot different than the French, the Dutch, the Russia approach, which is a real-time review of material transactions and issues. And the taxpayer works with the U.S. government to identify those issues for review, and the theory that those issues will be resolved before the filing of the return to give the taxpayer predictability with regards to that particular tax return. Assuming that there are a number of years of successful CAP and taxpayers have shown open and honest communication, a transparent and cooperative behavior, they've shown and proven strong internal controls, and that they in general are entering into low-risk transactions, then they can apply for what's called the compliance maintenance phase, okay? Which is basically where the U.S. government will adjust their level of review based on this history of compliance and risk, and get to a point where maybe not even every year is reviewed from a compliance perspective, but for example, every other year or every 3 years. So that in effect is big picture, the phases. Now, as discussed, there are a number of countries that have initiated different kinds of horizontal monitoring programs, and in our experience, all of them have certainly advantages, which I'll go through in a minute, and other considerations. From an advantage standpoint, from the taxpayer perspective, it provides certainty, both from a financial point of view as well as from a planning perspective. Okay, and from a financial point of view, again, nobody wins when you've got uncertain tax positions. Okay, the taxpayer doesn't win because there's no predictability or certainty with regards to that position. That can lead to many times to needing to accrue tax reserves in the financial statements, which can drag down earnings per share, which can ultimately impact your share price. And we've experienced as a company, when you've determined you don't need tax reserves and you release them, the market considers you as having generated non-core earnings, and so you don't get credit for building tax reserves, you don't get credit for releasing tax reserves, and so therefore, who wants to be in a situation where there is uncertainty in the tax profile and therefore need to consider reserves? So the advantage of CAP or any horizontal monitoring program is to bring certainty with respect to financial statements and the overall tax position of the company. In addition to bring certainty to planning, okay? If you've had issues in the past and you've successfully resolved and negotiated those, then you've got certainty with respect to how the government is going to view those issues going forward, assuming similar facts and circumstances, as well as if you've got a material transaction and you've got an uncertainty in tax with regards to that, certainly getting that agreed prior, in a perfect world, to executing the transaction, but certainly before filing the tax return, is an advantage. Longer term, and I'll get to this in a minute, on the shorter term aspect, it does provide capacity, both to the U.S. government as well as to the taxpayer. The amount of resources, we have a tax organization today that's about 260 people globally. I will tell you that probably 200 of those at any given time are dealing with some form of tax controversy. And so the opportunity to eliminate controversy initially is a huge opportunity for us in terms of creating capacity for the company and the organization to focus on, frankly, more important things. And in addition, there's a reputational advantage, okay? We believe that our transparency as a company, particularly in the APA process, has given us a reputation globally that allows us to minimize the amount of controversy, but also participate in forums with governments to help advise on tax policy, as well as best practices from a tax point of view. The considerations, I won't call these disadvantages because I think they're just considerations. It goes to the mindset point that's been made now a couple of times. But one, there is a significant upfront investment in the U.S. Compliance assurance process, in that there is a lot of resources needed to get current to be able to get into the program. In addition, there's a need for adequate and timely disclosure of items, and that in and of itself is not typically a huge deal, other than sometimes, as mentioned earlier, the company moves at the speed of light, whether they're changing a business model, whether they're looking at a potential acquisition or a potential divestiture or a joint venture or a split up of a part of the business. That sort of disclosure and that sort of process, trying to pre-align that, sometimes can, if not fully engaged, both the company and the government can sometimes slow up that process, which can lead to particular business issues. There's an expectation of heightened responsiveness to information requests. And again, in a world of transparency and trust, there's a belief that if I ask you for something and I'm asking you for information, you're going to immediately and transparently, in a full disclosure, respond. And that is true, but sometimes there's an expectation you're going to do that quicker than you actually can gather all the facts and gather all the documentation. So at times that can create a little bit of conflict. Obviously, transparency is a consideration. Not for us personally, but I know for other companies, the thought of being fully transparent, fully disclosed on a all-the-time, real-time basis may not be appealing. We think actually that's the world we live in today. That's where the world is headed. And so in that regard, this is not a huge consideration for us, but I know for many taxpayers it is. And then in addition, material items and transactions must be fully developed and concluded, hopefully before you file the return. And again, that can create sometimes a resource issue. All right? So with that, if I were going to summarize the factors for success, both with the U.S. CAP program as well as any horizontal monitoring program, it takes leadership and accountability, both on the government side as well as the taxpayer side. It does take transparency, again, on both sides, okay? Clear expectations is very important. Okay, a lack of understanding, a lack of agreement in terms of what's material, what's not, what should be disclosed, what's not, how much time Will a taxpayer have to disclose that particular information, in what format, et cetera? Making sure that that's clearly understood between both parties is very important. A sense of urgency, both, again, on the side of the government as well as the taxpayer, is important. Objectivity, okay? And one of the concerns that you will hear, at least in the U.S. program today, is the lack of training and experience of people that are responsible for both the company tax positions as well as the government's technical expertise. And so making sure that you have the right training and expertise both internally, and the government has the right training and expertise with its tax administration is very important. Must have a resolution mindset, okay? Must want to resolve things. Again, I think that occurs naturally with trust, transparency, and cooperation. Both the company and the government must have the resources to resolve the issues if and when they arise through the process. And as we've said, as all the panelists have said to date, trust is incredibly important. And so these aren't unique, again, to the U.S. Compliance Assurance Program. I think these are factors for success in any horizontal monitoring program. And we are very supportive of that. I think the world calls for and is going to call for more transparency. And as globalization continues to occur, as tax issues become more challenging to resolve, I believe that horizontal monitoring as a general theme is a great development. And I look forward to it continuing to be a positive trend globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ted. And again, I think I would ask the same question of Wilbur Humans. Wilbur, could you please tell us about your position when it comes to this program? And how do you evaluate the steps that are being undertaken for horizontal monitoring in Russia?
Yes, thank you. But first I would like to thank you as well, Mr. Arakelov, for the invitation to speak here today on a topic that is dear to my heart and strongly supported by Shell. It's a privilege to be here at this exciting stage of the Russian horizontal monitoring program. The Netherlands has been mentioned quite a few times by the previous speakers, and I'm pleased to share some of my experiences we have in the Netherlands. And before I do that, I think I can echo the words of the previous speakers. All the comments and all the observations made by them are in more or less the same manner applicable to the Netherlands. All the benefits for taxpayers, the benefits for the tax authorities. And I especially like the example Dimitri gave about the two porcupines. Because, of course, it's difficult to have two porcupines come together. But we all know that if they don't come together, there is no future for porcupines at all. So at some stage, we need to make sure that these programs are going to work. But that, again, is a learning process, and I hope that this roundtable help us to find some of these learnings. Before I go into the Dutch situation, I would like to first tell you a bit about Shell, briefly introduce Shell, because then you understand why we so strongly support all these global programs. This slide is a mandatory slide for me because we are stock listed. We need to include it. But this slide, it's rather small. It just tells you that Shell is a truly global business. We are active in 70 countries with around 92,000 employees. And in 2013, and we are headquartered in The Hague. And because of our business, we are a big proponent of innovation. And we think that horizontal monitoring programs are a form of innovation in an area that it's normally not so innovative as it seems. Tax compliance is not always associated with innovative measures, but I think that global compliance programs are indeed. If you then may move to this slide, and you see a picture of my CFO, Mr. Simon Henry, who was present at the OECD FTA meeting here in May, last year in May, where the report that Jean-Pierre and also Peter referred to was published. And at that same meeting, Mr. Mishustin, the commissioner, announced this project of the 4 companies. And, you know, we see this, and our CFO stated that this is an excellent way, these kind of programs, to de-risk our business. And why we find that so important, because you see, although in small print, the enormous amounts of tax we need to manage. Roughly, we manage 20 billion direct taxes on a global basis, and we collect on behalf of the various governments 80 billion. That's an enormous amount of money, so any possibility to de-risk that process is welcomed, more than welcomed. And let me then focus on the very practical way we exercise the horizontal monitoring in the Netherlands. Because, as I said, I think the previous speakers already told you a lot about the conceptual advantages and disadvantages. But how we do this in practice? Well, basically, back in 2006, the Dutch tax administration took a bold step. And they just started with 20 companies. They did not really have in mind certain conditions, but I thought, you know, companies that are willing to participate, of course, they need to be of a certain size. They are welcome. So they started with 20 companies, and Shell was one of that group of 20. And basically what happens is that we come together on a frequent, regular basis. So, and we do that for all taxes: corporate income tax, employment tax, VAT, customs. All our tax experts meet with the counterparts at the tax authorities and have discussions and share the tax risks we face, and also discuss the tax risks the tax authorities think there are. And by having this conversation and sharing this information, you will see that the business understanding of the tax authorities increases enormously, but also there is an understanding of the need for certainty on the side of the business. And I think it's that very fruitful conversation that has been tremendously successful. And that resulted in the situation that as of some 2-3 years ago, there are no real tax uncertainties for the Netherlands, for Shell in the Netherlands. All questions, all tax uncertainties we have are being discussed and resolved in a very limited amount of time, mostly within 1 month, 2 months. Of course, it should be very clear that the laws and regulations in the Netherlands apply. It's not about getting some sweetheart deal in that conversation. No, the law just is being applied by the tax authorities. But because you have this open discussion, and you have a discussion in advance of certain transactions, you can also amend and change a proposed transaction in a way that is appreciated by the tax authorities. We all know as tax experts that the world is not white or black. You know, when you apply the law, there are different shades of gray. And, well, it's in the value is then in the conversation, how to apply the law to the facts presented by the company. Of course, it's very clear, we still can agree or disagree on the issues. So if the tax inspector thinks this is a very, well, important issue, we can agree to go to court and ask the judge for his decision. But there is another element that is very important, and I think that has been touched on already as well. And that's this trust of having this open conversation is not just a blind form of trust. We have to show as a company that we have a robust tax control framework in place. And that has taken some time to show, to prove to the tax authorities that our tax systems do generate and also identify the tax uncertainties the tax inspector wants to hear. And to be honest, that took some time in the Netherlands to develop. It was a bold step to start back in 2006, and over time, the tax administration and companies realized that we need to invest more time in developing an understanding on tax control frameworks. And you also see that as one of the recommendations of this OECD report presented in 2013. Also, the OECD is going to do some work on that. It's one of its recommendations. But you also see that in the Netherlands, this was a learning process. And you won't be able to read this, of course, but it shows a bit of the steps we moved through to come to a more robust understanding of what tax control framework should be, what the quality should be of that framework, and at what kind of quality the tax authorities can agree in reducing the supervisory activities. Because that's it. The more open the company is, the less supervision the tax authorities should apply. That does not mean they stop the supervision or the monitoring, but they can reduce it and use those resources for other ways to for other taxpayers. And basically, you know, the picture in the front is showing the, and excuse me, the translation, the house of supervision that the tax authorities in the Netherlands would like to see. On the left side, you see the building blocks that the company needs to put in place. That is more or less the building blocks that form your tax control framework. In the middle, the pillar, you see the covenant or the agreement a company has with the tax authorities when they enter the horizontal monitoring program. And on the right side, you see the building blocks the tax authorities need to put in place, because also the tax authorities is required to do some steps. And I think the most important step in that is the change management process that should be done throughout the tax authorities, because indeed, it has been said again, it requires a shift in mindset. You know, going from audit to having an open conversation and trusting the taxpayer what he, the facts he is presenting. And basically, that's, you know, also in view of the time, that is what I would like to share with you on the Netherlands. There is a lot of documentation available, also in English, so that might be helpful for you. But I also would like to encourage you to take a next step. And that's, of course, I know that the horizontal monitoring program in Russia is still in its early stages. But I would like to encourage you to take a next step, and that is going to a multilateral horizontal monitoring agreement. And that's something we have in place between the UK, the Netherlands, and us as Shell. So basically, the same relation we have with the Dutch tax authorities, we have with the UK tax authorities. And issues that relate to both countries are discussed in one meeting. And I think that all tax experts in this room can understand how tremendously efficient that is if you can share documents at the same time to both tax authorities and have an explanation of the facts in that same meeting, where all parties know what is said to the other party, and that is a real fruitful ground for building trust. So I would like to wish that at some point in time, Russia follows these steps as well. And I can only wish you a lot of success with that. Thank you, Mr. Arakelov.
Thank you very much, Wilbert. Well, I can tell you from myself that I visited the Netherlands 2 years ago, and I met with the tax administration. What it gave me, it actually gave me an understanding how correct this mechanism is and how correct this model is, so that meeting with your colleagues from tax administration was extremely fruitful and very important for me. Unfortunately, we do not have much time left. We said we were talking a lot about the bill, which is currently being viewed in the State Duma, but that's why I would like to talk about it right now, and I would like to give the floor to Yelena Suvorova, who is the head of pre-court settlement of tax disputes in the Federal Taxation Service. She also participated in the development, in the drafting of this bill. So, Yelena, I give the floor to you.
I'll try to be very brief. This is probably the most interesting part of it, because Sergey has already told you the key conceptual points, and I'll try to explain how we arrived to this. Now, from the very outset, question was that we abandoned the idea of on-site audits, and the reason we made this choice is that this is a new approach to arrange access to accounts there. This is about arranging access to financial accounts and statements. This actually replaces any on-site reviews, but then the position adopted was that we cannot completely abandon the idea of having such on-site audits, because when a tax return is filed, when you cancel relations, terminate relations, or relations are terminated by one of the parties, or the tax administration finds that the information provided by the taxpayer was incomplete or inaccurate, or it's found that wrongdoings have been committed. All those instances are indicative of the fact that over the time of the agreement, you need to be able to monitor and control the accounts over the period covered by this extensive information cooperation agreement. Now, Article 89 on on-site audits has exceptions. All of them are justified. Then what comes next is not just the approach itself, but a mechanism for the settlement of all issues. This is a mixed mechanism, not just an approach to administration. This is about dispute settlement, a mechanism of enforcement. So this is not just access and monitoring of financial statements. This is about settlement of tax risks by formulating motivated opinions. So it's not just the taxpayer who can come to us with questions or requests, and of course motivated opinions are issued at request. But then the tax authority has got to understand that the tax return, when filed, may give rise to disputed questions. So in the course of monitoring, such tax risks have to be found. so that the taxpayer can take that into consideration before filing the tax return, or take it into consideration. Then the taxpayer, in starting this joining this monitoring process, as we discussed, should think, where's the cutoff point, where the tax authority can say that, say, 12 months monitoring is over, so we put a full stop here and move on. Then lack of claims or is recorded, or something like that is done, instead of directives about any breaches. So the construction is that annually the tax administration can issue motivated opinions, but that ends with the end of the calendar year. That's why this shows you this statement of annual motivated opinions, so that once a year is elapsed, the tax authority cannot get back to something, to a transaction that took place in the previous period. Whether this is right or wrong, we'll see in the course of the discussion of the bill and its implementation. But this is some kind of dialogue that creates motivated opinions that you can discuss or argue. Now we have an option where the taxpayer disagrees with the motivated opinion, and then the taxpayer informs the higher-ranking tax authority, informing them of their disagreement and requesting to initiate a investigation procedure or settlement procedure, so that the tax authority can settle this, and trying to find any potential error or mistake, making sure that all documents were provided and were taken into account. So this is another step towards dialogue, not just disagreement with the motivated opinion, but once again, this is the possibility to meet again and discuss the positions of both parties. If the motivated opinion has been issued and the settlement committee has is over, then this is about a conversation that ends up with an opinion that must be entered into the tax return. So then in the law you will see an accent on taking into account, to consider the opinions, and if the taxpayer, going further, gets any negative implications in terms of changes in the motivated opinion, or additional tax accruals, then you need some guarantee in the law. And another provision that was suggested, and which is also important, companies have discussed this more than once: what happens if the tax administration fails to provide timely motivated opinions using their rights? The tax risks have been disclosed to the tax administration, and the tax authority can then use them for any additional tax accruals. So the law provides for reduced tax liability. Well, this says total cancellation, but basis for a reduction of tax liability is the disclosure of tax risks in the form of request. This is under discussion now, but we believe this is an important guarantee that was discussed. So this is probably it, the key provisions of the bill that conceptually will not change. Only the technicalities may change, like the timelines and list of documents necessary. Thank you, Elena. I'd like to give the floor to Dmitry Fadeyev, who's been working on this for a long time now. And as far as I know, the Chamber of Commerce and Industries published a summary of the pluses and minuses. So let's listen what do you have to say. Good afternoon and thank you. Let's have my slides on the screen, please. I present the Russian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. In the beginning of this year, a roadmap of improved tax administration was adopted, and it covers our today's topic, which is an interesting one. The Chamber is one of the largest business associations with 54,000 members, 177 local chambers. We've distributed distributed this bill through our internal system and are receiving responses on the holders' support. And we have tried to group all the comments and wishes, observations made in the form of a bifurcation, because this will be used either in a second reading or otherwise, because it'll either work for a year and then you can get back to these issues. So what I'm actually talking about is membership, entry and withdrawal. Now, membership will be extended by having a consolidated list, and we will include foreign companies as well. As regards entry and withdrawal, there's interesting experience here, like in the Netherlands, this deep entry inspection or review with interactions, and the taxpayer enters into a dialogue with the tax administration without having the burden of any disputes. And the second point is a bill that Elena told us about, is the unilateral termination of the agreement initiated by the tax administration, the one of information cooperation, and an on-site tax audit is launched, is scheduled. We believe that such termination is only possible if the taxpayer is in breach of any conceptual, provided some inaccurate information, lied to the tax authority. And for our further discussion, if this is discussed by the time of the second reading, maybe we should contemplate some mirror provision for the tax authority, so that the taxpayer can also withdraw from these relations in the event of any significant reason for that. Now, information exchange, everybody has noted that the information and the agreement itself can be regarded as tax secret, but the current trend now is that the list of information is extended. So the next proposal, which may seem too technical, but this is a feature of the Russian law application system. Maybe we should describe in more detail what is access to the data of financial accounts of the taxpayer. Next proposal is partly of a conceptual nature. Let me remind you that the bill establishes a number of limits to the number of on-site audits. However, maybe we should introduce a limit for the substance of the audit itself, or the subject of the audit. something that is the subject of the dispute with the tax administration. This talks about the ratio between the proportion between the monitoring and other forms of tax control, because we've faced situations where highly skilled people from the very beginning are unable to build this construction. So there's several messages possible here. If within a month there were desk audits completed with no breaches found, no facts of non-compliance, then these tax periods should not be subject to any further audits, or limit the subject of the desk audit to the accuracy of the tax return. And finally, this is a cross provision. Indeed, there's if there have been any other sealing documentation, so to avoid any excessive paperwork, because the tax authority is doing everything for this lately. And now this drafted, this expected Article 105.27, the procedure for entering this program. Taxpayers, individuals, we could take the existing article on interdependent persons, the 25% share or greater. So this is relevant particularly for companies with a large number of shareholders, and this is also important for companies that are incorporated in the form of a OAO, an open stockholding company. So in order to not to exceed my time, let me say that tax policy issues are in the focus of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I would like to convey our gratitude from our management for constructive interactions. Fadeev and Selivanov are in charge of tax policy, so if you're responsible tax policy. So if you're interested, this is our website where you can learn more about the work of the expert board, and you can take part. Thank you. Thank you, Dmitry. If you don't mind, we've heard the key points. Dmitry mentioned this, and then transfer pricing was discussed. I'd like to ask Dmitry Kazansky to comment on that. Dmitry was also part of the work on this bill. We don't have much time, Dmitry, so 5 minutes max. Thank you, Sergey. Let me introduce myself. I am Dmitry Kazansky. I represent the Federal Tax Office. I was part of the pilot project for horizontal monitoring, a member of the working group, and was involved in the drafting of the bill. Indeed, Dmitry has outlined a number of relevant issues. Some of them are of a conceptual nature, have been discussed more than once in the course of the preparation, and some of the issues are about mistrust, because this is something new. And as regards desk audits and the desire by the business that if they are under tax monitoring, then any reviews must be retrospective. You all will know that the text of the law is published on the website and contains no such provisions. However, the concern can be eliminated by the fact that amendments are being made to the relevant articles, whereby the taxpayer is free from any fines if the position of the tax administration changes subsequently. If you are simultaneously in tax monitoring and you have a desk review and you have an opinion issued, then these risks are leveled out, in my view. Now, as regards topical reviews, I believe the list of grounds is limited. Termination of agreement because the taxpayer provided inaccurate or incomplete information. We discussed it with international experts. This is about trust. If the tax authority found that the information was inaccurate, then standard methods of tax control should apply, and hopefully foreign experts will agree or will comment on this so that we know how this works in Western jurisdictions. Next, transfer pricing. We have a parallel construction for tax monitoring and transfer pricing, including for the constituent entities, because the monitoring agreement, based on what Elena Savorova said, it's made with your local tax administration, and only in the event of disagreement between a tax authority and the taxpayer initiates a agreement procedure, a reconciliation procedure, or goes to the upper instance, while the transfer pricing mechanism is on the level of the federal tax office. So this is where we have different levels of the tax authorities.
When it comes to KGN, this is a very topical issue because the major group of taxpayers are part of the consolidated group. For them, this issue is more topical. They are also interested in this regime to be applied to them. This is a very comprehensive issue, and Dmitry Fadeev said that the law is formulated in such a way that even extremely qualified lawyers have these questions. But even if we introduce the horizontal monitoring institute, then it complicates the attitude to this law. Today we have 12 companies within horizontal monitoring system, and they're registered with 10 or 11 tax authorities. Some of them are in the federal cities, some of them in the regions of the federations. That's why we have an issue of the administration. One of the parties to the agreement is the tax authority, and we're saying that the subject of tax monitoring is internal control. But we're only talking about income tax when we're talking about horizontal monitoring. So that's why a participant doesn't even have to introduce tax accounting, because if they provide untrue information, then the penalty is imposed on the participant. Another issue is that we have a complicated tax administration procedure, and here I agree with the experts and the representative of Shell and Procter & Gamble. They were saying that the most advantageous position is the definitive nature and the fast response. So I think it satisfies this criteria, because we set the time frame of 1 month. So the companies have to provide information within 1 month after receiving a query. And I think the efficiency of this mechanism from the point of view of taxpayer might not probably be the best, so might not correspond to initial objective. This is what has been discussed by the experts, by the representatives of large companies, and by legal departments of other organizations. So thank you very much. I have to keep within the time frame, so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, we shall probably finish our discussion. Do you have any questions or any comments on today's discussion? Please. I'm really sorry. My question is to Wilbert Humans. You were the trailblazers when it came to the relations between the taxpayers and the tax authorities. How do you regulate these relations? Do you regulate them on a legislative basis or not?
In the Netherlands, there is no separate legislation for this horizontal monitoring program. It's all within the boundaries of existing legislation, although, and that's the slide I showed, there is a lot of guidance for taxpayers and for tax administration staff available to help them through this process. That documentation is publicly available, so both taxpayers and tax administration staff can use it, but there is no additional legal framework implemented in the law. Is that a good answer? Yes?
Any other questions? Well, dear colleagues, I would like to thank everybody for an extremely interesting and stimulating discussion. I would like to thank our speakers for extremely interesting presentation and for actually giving us a confirmation that we're all moving in one direction, and all of the approaches that we use, they're actually quite similar. This gives me a lot of optimism. I also believe that the topic that we discussed today, we were discussing a completely different approach to the relations between tax administration and taxpayers. We believe that it is the future. We are absolutely open, and during the second reading of the bill, we are ready to voice our concerns and discuss it with the deputies. And we also believe that it is the first step, but of course we understand that we have to think about the criteria which are part of the bill today. Maybe these criteria are a bit high, and then again should be discussed. The consolidated tax should also be discussed. And I think that the taxpayers that are part or regulated by this project are probably not more than 200 taxpayers, but of course we unequivocally agree that we have to proceed further. We have to develop the same model for small and medium-sized enterprises. We should not have any type of discrimination. I would also like to give you assurances that the Federal Tax Service will continue developing the direction which exists today when it comes to the enforcement procedures. Of course, you see that we developed the pre-court regulation system. We are moving to new forms of tax control. Also, this procedure expands informational cooperation. We are offering absolutely new procedures, reconciliation procedures, which were not there before. We are also going on to work a lot on developing tax mediation. We have an understanding of how it might work, but of course I have to say that this is a very complex issue. But since currently we have no mediation for tax relations, but I think when we have certain disputes, methodologically challenging or other complex issues that are of interest to taxpayers and tax authorities, maybe we really have to consider who can mediate in the process. This is, again, a complicated issue. We can attract representatives from the academia, maybe former judges, and so on. But in any case, I would like all of you to participate in this work as well. So if you have any sort of proposals, we'd be more than open to discuss that. So I think that concludes our discussion for today. Thank you very much. А что это?